Hey guys, Redgrave here. I thought it might be nice now that I've pretty much completed Dark Souls 3 to its maximum extent, to just sort of give my overall impressions of the game and its lore and its story, because I know that that's what a lot of people come to my channel for is like lore and story. I'm not planning on doing too much for Dark Souls 3 in terms of content, but I thought, cause people might be interested in just hearing my overall thoughts on it. So, real quick, just spoiler warning all throughout. If just for everything, because for bosses, lore, everything. So if you're not finished, or if you're not completely finished and you don't want to be spoiled on anything in particular, just come back whenever you're done. As far as the game went, I started out very disappointed. Actually, I found the first few areas and the first few bosses to be very bland, very uninteresting, very disappointing. Really, I was pretty initially underwhelmed. I think underwhelmed is a better way to put it than disappointed. I was very underwhelmed at first. I think when you get to Aldrich, that's a very big turning point, and I think everything after Aldrich is phenomenal. I think the Twin Princes is great. I think the Consumed King is great. I think the fight against the collective consciousness of chosen undeads is phenomenal. I think that the fight against Aldrich is great. But really leading up to that, it's very... I really was not too impressed. As far as the gameplay goes, I really like the weapon art system. I didn't have a chance to try out every single one, but I tried out quite a few, and I think it's a very interesting way. But I do think that the weapon art system very much butchers the viability of spellcasting builds, and I think that the change from the use system for spells to having it be reliant on the same thing as the weapon arts is a devastating, almost a nail in the coffin for viable spellcasting builds. I can't really imagine playing a spellcaster in Dark Souls 3 simply because there's no real reason to invest much in attunement other than getting more FP. The slots seem sort of irrelevant now because, and it did work in Demon Souls to a better extent because MP was only used for these spells, and because there weren't very many spells, so they had different functions. But in Dark Souls 3, where it's like why would I ever use a soul arrow ever? Because that MP that I would be wasting, or that I'm just going to call it mana and MP, because whatever. The mana I would be spending on the soul arrow is something I should be using for something else. So you can't separate the different uses, which you could in Dark Souls 1 and 2. So I really think that while the weapon art system is fantastic, I think it really I don't think spellcasting is viable in Dark Souls 3 as a method of playing the game, especially because you have to sacrifice Estus in order to really use it. But but again, I really like how the Ashen stuff works for the weapon art system. So I don't know. The level design, I was incredibly disappointed by how many bonfires there are. Like every 5 feet, there's like a new bonfire. The few levels that didn't do that were great. Like the Cathedral of the Deep, which has one bonfire, that's it. It has like one at the start of the zone and one in the boss room, but it only has one real bonfire, and I think that level design is great, where it loops in on itself. I was really looking forward to seeing sort of Bloodborne-style shortcut level design in Dark Souls 3, and it kind of fell flat. It's not really there, other than a few places, like Cathedral of the Deep, which is the one that sticks out in my head. The bosses, again, I think everything before Aldrich is kind of lame. Um, and I think Aldrich is this really good turning point, and I think everything after that is great. The Covenants, I think, are a joke. um, the Covenants are laughably bland and slapped on. If you had told me that the Covenants in Dark Souls 3 would be worse than the Covenants in Dark Souls 1, I would have been astonished. Because they were bad in Dark Souls 1, and yet they're still better than the ones we have here. Two of the Covenants do the exact same thing. Like Blue Sentinels and Dark Moonblade are literally the exact same Covenant. The Way of Blue has no rewards whatsoever, which it has even less rewards than it had in Dark Souls 2. There's no blue orbs. Like it is just a lot of overall problems. That being said, the online netcode is phenomenal. I had so much fun enjoying Dark Souls PvP in an area in an arena where I wasn't dealing with like the world's biggest lag stabs and like the world's biggest phantom weapon ranges. I did enjoy having like actual hitboxes and sort of more reasonable PvP because the online coding was done really well. That pretty much sums it up for gameplay. Just my overall ideas. As far as the story goes, I actually liked it a lot more than I thought it would. The one complaint I have is that it really did just sweep Dark Souls 2 aside and basically just make it non-canonical. Incredibly difficult to fit Dark Souls 2 into the story now. The only way I really managed to make it work for me is if you just consider Dark Souls 2 an alternate timeline, because it is next to impossible to fit the lore of Dark Souls 2 into Dark Souls 3 at this point. The DLC might change things, but as it stands now, Dark Souls 3 is or Dark Souls 2 rather is basically non-canonical, which I think is a shame. Because while Dark Souls 2 did have a lot of problems, there was some interesting stuff in there, and there were some interesting ideas, and I think it is kind of a shame. I do like how Dark Souls 3 is basically just a direct sequel to Dark Souls 1. The problem Dark Souls 2 had was that it was trying to be its own world and its own universe and have its own story, except it kept having too many callbacks and references to Dark Souls 1. Whereas Dark Souls 3, I don't mind all the references and callbacks to Dark Souls 1 because it is such a direct sequel. It's literally like, this is what happens next to Lordran. So I don't mind it. I love a few things. I love that we get to meet the Firstborn, and I really love that the Firstborn is just some completely new character that we have never met before. I love that it's not Solaire and it's not Andre. I would have bet money on it being Vamos or Andre, but apparently the nameless blacksmith deity is different from the Firstborn. So hey, who knows? Maybe Andre is still a deity. Who knows? So I really did like the Firstborn. Speaking of the Archdragon Peak, I loved that we got to see what appear to be infant stone dragons, sort of coming to mind when you combine that with the whole ash motif as covering the world in gray, and you combine that with the fact that the corpses and the skeletons appear to be turning into trees. It sort of brings to mind this idea that the world is resetting itself and sort of slowly going back to the Age of Gray. And I really like that idea because it implies that the cycle that we've been so concerned with, the cycle of fire and dark, is just part of this whole bigger cycle with the Age of Gray into fire and then slowly leading back to another Age of Gray, because it brings to mind this possibility that maybe the Age of Gray that we know of was the millionth Age of Gray, and this cycle has in fact been going on for eternity upon eternity upon eternity, and I think that's very thematically appropriate to Dark Souls. Let's see. I did like Aldrich, although... No, I really did like Aldrich. The one problem is that he appears to have Nito stuff in him, but that's literally impossible, so who knows. I did like the Velka stuff because I am a really big fan of Velka and Velka's whole plot. Velka appears to have something to do with the Sable Church of Londor, if only because the Sable Church has basically appropriated all of Velka's miracles into its teachings, and the Sable Church all wears black, and it's run by women. Not only that, but the Corvians, who are the sort of crow the crow human enemies that you fight in the Road of Sacrifice. Like they start out looking like humans and then they sprout wings, and there's like the mages that spit poison. Those are called Corvians, and the description says that they spread stories of the painted world, and they're heretic storytellers. So I like that. Seems to, and they also drop hologems, which are used a lot in Londor. So I like that there seems to be some kind of implication that the Sable Church is related to Velka. I'm not really interested in analyzing the plot or the lore at this moment, if only because I'm waiting for the DLC. And Dark Souls 1 DLC was very much about filling in a big chunk that was missing. It had to do with Artorias and the Furtive Pygmy, and I feel like Dark Souls 3 will be the same, where it fills in big chunks that are missing. I feel like we know there's going to be 3 DLCs. I was talking to JSF a little bit, and we came up with a basic rundown of 3 possible DLCs, which would be one having to do with Velka, Londor, and the Primordial Serpents, one having to do with Yorm and the Profaned Flame, whatever the Profaned Flame is. Interestingly enough, JSF told me that the kanji used for profane is the same in the Profane Capital and the Profane Flame is the same as the kanji used for sin in Scholar of the First Sin. So hopefully that means we will get some Dark Souls 2 Aldia stuff, which I think would be nice and would be interesting. So maybe that'll be another one. And then another one maybe something to do with Osiris and Ocelot, which would be interesting. JSF and I, we were just chatting idly, and we talked about how Ocelot is a very similar name to Shanalot, who is another child of dragons. So maybe some kind of other implication there. The story I liked. I liked that they appear to be tying everything together and not trying to raise a lot of mysterious questions, and it really does feel like the game is coming together and everything's sort of being tied up nicely. Having played this, I am glad that the Souls series... Sorry, it's a plane overhead. I am glad that the Souls series appears to be ending, because I do feel, having played this game, I feel like they've sort of pushed it as far as it can go, at least in terms of the Dark Souls setting. I don't feel like there's much more they could do with it that wouldn't just be milking it. I think a Dark Souls 4... I can't imagine a Dark Souls 4 that wouldn't just be milking and reusing and at that point I can't imagine a Dark Souls 4 that would be innovative at this point. So I do like that Miyazaki and FromSoft appear to be moving on. That sort of just sums up my general thoughts of Dark Souls 3. I don't know if I'll be doing more content. I might stream a level 1 playthrough. It's the only thing I haven't done in Dark Souls 3, and I did one in Demons, DS1, DS2, and Bloodborne, so I might do one for Dark Souls 3. But other than that, thank you for watching. These are just my overall thoughts of it. And feel free to let me know what you thought of Dark Souls 3 in the comments, or send me messages or whatever like that. And I don't know when my next video will be. It'll be whenever I get the chance. Right now, I'm super busy right now. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I appreciate it.